Now, before the break, I had made the comment that 1st and 2nd Kings is Deuteronomic history, history from the point of view of Deuteronomy. Well, that means it's a religious history. It's history made to promote, perhaps, some theological position, which some might call propaganda, and call into question whether or not it is an objective history, whether it's a real history. So I would like to speak to that issue. I'd like to talk a little bit now about, can it be a religious history and be history? Is the Deuteronomic historian being objective? Can he be fair with the facts? Well, I'm going to start by giving you a quote from Kenneth Latourette in his 2-volume work, A History of Christianity. In the beginning of his work, he is dealing with this exact same problem. He is writing from the standpoint of a Christian. A critic might say that since he's a Christian, he can't be objective about the history of the church. So he is answering that charge. And here is a quote from him, and let me read it to you. I believe this quote is in the outline of the course that I have published for you on the Moodle site. That's one of the resources, by the way, is the whole course is outlined for you. Let me read it to you. No one can hope to write history without presuppositions. The professional historian of the 19th and 20th centuries has aspired to be objective and to tell what actually happened. Yet every attempt to view the human story, whether in some small segment or as a whole, involves a selection of events from the stream which constitutes the crude stuff of history. Back of this selection is a conviction of what is important. Governing this value judgment is, whether or not he knows it, a philosophy. Underneath and conditioning any endeavor to determine what happened also lies a theory of knowledge called epistemology, which attempts to answer questions like, can we know? How do we know? How valid is our knowledge? How complete is our knowledge? All right, so what is he saying here? We want to know what really happened. That's what we want. This is objective. Just tell us what happened. But in reality, though, a historian has to sift through a lot of information, a mass of data, and make decisions about what's important and what's not. And those decisions are based on his attitude, his philosophy about history. He has to decide what events are important and what events didn't lead to anything and are unimportant. He has to decide, how complete is our knowledge? Should I recount this event, or do I not trust the guy that recorded it? Let me continue with Kenneth Latourette. He writes, there have been and still are many theories of knowledge, many different answers to these questions. In other words, the questions that I'm raising, I'm not just knocking down a straw man or raising questions that have easy answers. There's many There's a great variety, many different ways of answering these questions. He continues, many interpretations or philosophies of history have been held. Some are being held. Some are basically agnostic, saying, well, there's no pattern in history. And if there is a pattern, we can't discover it. And all one can confidently affirm then about the philosophies of history is we don't know if any of them are right. Other views of history are cyclical, right? History occurs in cycles, endlessly repeating itself. Others affirm some kind of progress. The view associated with the name of Hegel is one of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, kind of combining progress with cycles. The Hindu has traditionally regarded history like human life itself, as an illusion. The 19th and 20th century effort to determine what actually happened, consciously or unconsciously, has assumed that we can know what happened. In general, historians of the various schools of that period have believed they could discover causes and effects in history. That an event they can see led to the next thing. More and more, they've assumed also that history is universal and that mankind is one. So what happens to one person affects the whole. All right. What is he saying? He's saying that histories, as they are written, always have assumptions behind them about the nature of history that control as history is written. Like, for example, if you believe history is a series of endless cycles and you go to write a history of something, guess what you're going to find? Endless cycles. If you believe there's no pattern in history and you go to write a history about something, guess what you're going to find? No pattern. Right? That's what he's talking about. The modern view was that we can know what really happened. Now, comparing one thing with another, we can come up with at least a close approximation of what really happened. Now, in other words, that we can get away from ideology, that we can get away from spin. If you turn on the news, on any channel, well, any channel except one, you get spin, right? Somebody decided what was important, made a value judgment on it, and decided how to present it, except for one channel. What's the one channel that doesn't give you spin?
The one with all the snow on it.
What's the one channel that doesn't actually give you spin? Just gives you the facts as they come.
C-SPAN?
Exactly right. C-SPAN. Because C-SPAN, they just sit the camera there, and come what may, this is the congressional meeting or the school board meeting. This is what happened. There's no spin. It's just the facts. What's the problem with that?
Not terribly entertaining.
Yes, it's boring. No one watches it. We would prefer that somebody come along and take the 3-hour meeting and edit it down to only give us what's important. But if someone's going to do that, they have to decide what's important. And they're going to put their own slant on it, even if they don't intend to. Although I have to say, even C-SPAN you could say is spin. I remember when the camera in the in the House of Representatives in Washington. The camera was on the podium, and congressman after congressman, they were all Republicans, congressmen, getting up there and making these eloquent speeches. And I'm sitting there watching it on C-SPAN thinking, wow, how could anyone disagree with this? Why, this is so persuasive. How could anyone, find fault with these arguments? And they're going to have to carry the day. And then Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. And he finally got disgusted with the whole thing. So he ordered C-SPAN to change the angle of the camera. So the camera's angle was changed just a little bit, and now you could see the whole chamber. It was empty. These guys were getting up there at the podium and only playing to the camera, to the watching audience on C-SPAN. No one in Congress was listening to a word they said. And that completely changed the dynamic. You realize they're not persuading anyone. They're not even trying to persuade anyone in the chamber of Congress. So the very angle of the camera is spin, you could say, or is a perspective that is not giving you all the facts. We're using the word spin. What do we mean by spin? Here's some examples. Well, spin comes from putting a spin on a ball, right? So it doesn't go straight, but it curves off, right? Like when you play billiards, you put a spin on the ball so it goes around something. It doesn't shoot straight. I guess that's what the word comes from. What if you took 100 dentists and you asked them, would you recommend this kind of gum? 3 of them say they would out of 100. So you take those 3 and you put in a 4th, and you can say, without lying, 3 out of these 4 dentists will recommend this gum, right? So you say 3 out of 4 dentists. Is that a lie? Well, no, because these 4, that's true. But you're not giving all the information. So it's giving a false impression. Or even the word false may be too strong. It's giving an impression, leading you to think a certain way that you wouldn't if you had all the facts, right? It's like here you got this middle-aged politician caught in an adulterous affair, and they call it a youthful indiscretion. The guy's 60 years old. Youthful indiscretion, that makes it not sound so bad. It's just, call that spin. Or remember the days when you took the national budget and you ask for a 10% increase, and it's knocked down and you're given a 5% increase, right? Double inflation. And what's it called? A budget cut. They're increasing by 5%. It's a budget cut. They're not content with that. They call it a deep cut, but you're increasing at twice the rate of inflation. Spin, right? My littlest would play an upwards basketball, and we don't keep score. So he asked, well, how did we do compared to that other team? And I said, you did every bit as well as that other team. Well, that's spin if I've ever heard it. I mean, they were creamed. You ever get in the mail something that said, you may have already won? Never open it up and read it. You may have already won the opportunity to play the game, is what it was. Spin is presenting the facts to create an impression contrary to how they would be ordinarily understood, or how you would understand them if you had all the facts. Well, what would you call it? What's a good synonym for spin? Propaganda, okay. Half-truth, okay. Or advertisement, I think, is one. How about brainwashing, right? You only give half the side of an issue. Someone's brainwashed into thinking a certain way. Spin. Well, let me continue with Kenneth Scott Latourette. He continues, and he says, in the introduction to his history, Here is not the place to endeavor to determine which, if any, of the several philosophies is true, or even to seek for valid criteria by which they can be judged. That effort would necessitate a separate and larger book. At the outset, however, we must say, as clearly as we know how, that underlying the pages that follow, there is a profound conviction that the Christian gospel is God's supreme act on man's behalf, and that the history of Christianity is the history of what God has done for man through Christ and of man's response. So what is he saying there? He's saying that his own writing of history is done assuming that the history of the church is about the risen Christ and what God is doing in the world. So to study the history of the church is to study what God has been doing to redeem a people to himself. That's Latourette's full disclosure. Saying, I'm a Christian, I'm writing from that standpoint. That point of view, that standpoint, comma, that point of view. He continues, if it is complained that this is not an objective approach, it must be remembered that pure objectivity does not exist, even in the natural sciences. One is either for or against Christianity. There's no neutral or strictly objective ground. Sure, you use your reason. We use it in testing what is presented to us as facts and searching for other facts. But truth is not attained by reason alone. The insight that is born of faith can bring illumination. Now, faith is not credulity. And if what is called confidence and if what is called faith ignores reason, it does so to its peril. But uncritical confidence in reason as the sole criterion, the final criterion of that which is a blind act of credulity, which may be more dangerous than faith without reason. All right. What is he saying there? He's saying that his approach in writing history from the standpoint of Christianity is not any more or less able to get at what really happened than any other approach. He also said that to have a blind faith in the historian's power of reason is as dangerous as, ignoring the facts and plowing ahead with their history. All right, are your eyes starting to glaze over with this? Or okay. Let me give you one more quote, and I'm done with Kenneth Scott Latourette, okay? One more quote. Writing about his own history. Throughout the chapters which follow is the conviction that the faith which is stimulated by contact with the Christian gospel, the faith which is the commitment of God to God of the whole man, body, mind, and spirit, the commitment which is the response in love to God who is love and who in his love has revealed himself in Jesus Christ, opens the mind toward the true understanding of history. That we fail to understand history is due to our lack of such a commitment. That we understand it partly but imperfectly shows our commitment is incomplete. No one of us has made a full commitment to God. If we are honest with ourselves, we know how limited it is. We should therefore never claim infallibility for our interpretation of history. Yet so far as the faith which follows commitment has been given to us, we must seek in its light to perceive the road which man has thus far traversed. All right, I'm done with Kenneth Scott Latourette. What did he just say? First of all, he said, if you're a historian, you really can't understand the history of the church unless you're a Christian. That's what he said. Because the Christian understands what's really going on. To assume the truth of the gospel allows a historian to weigh what is important and what's not with an assumption that fits reality. Now, you can't do it perfectly, but you can substantially get a handle on history if you assume the truth of the gospel. In other words, it all makes sense if you assume the truth of the gospel. What is all this about? It's about this. There's no such thing as a neutral history. Neutral meaning a history apart from any faith commitment, a history apart from any philosophy of history. There's just no such thing. It can't be done. Even with C-SPAN, there's an angle to the camera that changes how things are seen. There's always philosophical commitments at work that control the decisions that are made in the writing of history.